Massive thank you as always to our top tier patron, Sarah Turner. It's Not Just In Your Head is hosted by psychotherapist Dr. Harriet Frudd, substance use disorder counsellor Ikoi Hiro, and myself, the editor and producer Liam Tate. This podcast is entirely funded by listeners, and as the famous meme states, we are critiquing capitalism because we are forced to participate in it in order to survive. So, if you can afford to give, then your contribution will ensure that we can keep making the show. However, if you can't, then please just leave a review on your podcast platform of choice, tell your friends about us, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, or YouTube. Massive thank you as always to Elle for organising our monthly reading groups and episode discussions, which you, dear listener, can join in too. Just head over to our Eventbrite page, and the link is in the show notes.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
Can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
We have a returning guest here this week. His name is Joshua, and he is here to talk about his experience of being a minor that was housed in an adult prison, which has become more of a common process since the 90s.
I guess maybe actually as a first place to start does the idea of mental health exist in prison? Are there resources to address that kind of stuff, or is it just like you have to just deal with it?
Myself, when I did my time, there was some mental health. It's there, but people really don't seek it out. They didn't seek it out at that time because the idea of going to mental health means you have a problem. So a lot of people didn't reach out and get the help that they obviously probably needed. They do have like annual psychology reviews and things like that where you go and talk to a psychologist and they just see how you're doing. But even in those meetings, you don't tell the truth because you're fearful that someone's going to find out that you might have a weakness or you might have, and you just don't want that in there. So yeah, mental health is definitely a stigma in there. I don't know about now, but I knew in about 99 to about 2006 when I did my time.
The weakness aspect, even if there's a quote unquote like a professional in there, you wouldn't want to share anything with them, or the fear is that other people are going to find out.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah.
How does it work that talk with someone because you have a need to talk is then puts a mark on you in the public eye?
Yeah, because inside they put call outs out, like a call out sheet, and everybody gets to see the call out sheet in every unit. So they know who's going where and doing what. If you're going to talk to a psychologist, then you must be telling on somebody. Well, that's a big thing. But
right.
I'm hoping it's changed since then. But yeah, so that's how it was in that time.
Yeah, I can see why that would stigmatize you because you are suspect immediately. It's supposed to be confidential. And by law, if you're not inside the carceral system, it is confidential whether you are seeking help or not. But I guess it isn't inside a youth prison, which of course stigmatizes you.
Yeah, it's there, but it's just a lot of people just didn't reach out to it. I wish I would have, obviously, because I wouldn't have had to do so much mental health work out here to get my life back together and try to become a normal part of society after being raised in a prison setting at such a young age. Yeah, I wish I would have taken advantage of it more in there. But
how has it manifested back in regular life then? Are there still things from growing up to some in that kind of place? Are there things like daily that it just still materializes issues for you?
Yeah. I'm always obviously having, once in a while you have flashbacks, you'll have dreams or night terrors, or even just you see a police officer and you shut down, or I work in a program that deals with DOC all the time. So being able to function around DOC officers nowadays is still pretty hard for me. I have a lot of PTSD, anxiety, sometimes even have a panic attack, but I try to work through that so that way I can still do the great work that I'm trying to do to help others coming from incarceration. But yeah, it's traumatized. It's going to probably be the rest of my life. I'll be traumatized from that ordeal. So yeah, it's definitely a day-by-day, step-by-step process that hopefully one day I'll come to terms and be at peace with it all. But I don't know.
What parts of the Department of Corrections traumatized you? Was it just existing there, or were there abusive conditions that traumatized you?
Yeah, it was. Well, when I fell, they had the way they ran it was pretty weird. It was almost surreal. It was like I was in some type of Twilight Zone movie or something, because when I got there to the prison, I was a minor. They put you right in segregation right when you get there. So you're isolated. You're all by yourself. You're in this little tiny cell, and you got all these crazy people out screaming and yelling and talking about this and that. And it's very traumatizing. And then the officers there at that time, they were pretty hardcore. They didn't really care about anything that you were going through, nothing. They were pretty much just dead as far as emotion. And then they transfer you. You stay 2 days there in the segregation in Shelton, Washington, which is the main facility where everybody goes to once you go to prison here in Washington State. And then they move you up to Clallam Bay, which was a closed custody facility where all the murderers, all the most violent crimes go there. And they were sending all the juveniles there to one of the units. And they did try to keep it. Yeah, I know. They did try to keep it segregated as much as they could, but you go out in the breezeway to a call out, or you go to lunch, or you go to the laundry room. There's adult inmates that work. We're always faced with seeing stabbings or fights or being catcalled. A lot of the adults like to catcall the kids. Ooh, baby, can't wait till you get out on mainline. I'm going to take all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of traumatization in that, especially when you've never dealt with the criminal justice system ever in your life. And then the officers they would put in those units were young. They were just getting fresh out of the academy, and they were putting them in our unit, and they were just playing games with everybody. They would play favoritisms with the gang members, or if somebody's weak, they'll open their cell door and let somebody go in there and beat them up or sexually assault them. I was out in the rotunda. They call it a rotunda, which is the outside area where the officers stand and watch. It almost reminds me of a goldfish bowl where you're sitting there and there's all this glass and they're just looking in. So I used to go out there and clean. And this officer came behind me with a red vine, one of those Twizzlers or red vines or whatever, liquor. And he put it down the back of my pants into my pants. And he turned around and he said, "You like that?" And I said, "No, I do not like that." And I grieved him. And the sergeant that was overseeing the unit, he pulled me in. He goes, "We're going to call this over with, and you just need to let it go." And he ripped up the grievance and said, "It's not going any farther than this." And I said, "Wow." And I knew right then and there that it was me against them always.
Wow.
Yeah. What I am particularly, I guess, thinking about is the conditions of life outside prison that enable or that foster some young people going into prison and push you in that direction. Because, of course, if your family had wealth, they'd get you off. What did you do if you want to discuss it? Because most offenses are things that a wealthy person's son would get off of.
Correct. Yeah. And everybody I've talked to about my case and my crime, like therapists and other people out in the community, lawyers, they said if I would have had a good lawyer or a lawyer that actually was going to fight for me, I would have never seen a day in jail or prison. I should never have been remanded to the adult system. The only reason they remanded me to the adult system is because I was 16 on the cusp of 17. And in this state, they can hold you in jail until you turn 17, and then they can go ahead and remand you to the adult system. I was a sexual offender at a young age, and it was more of a fondling thing. It happened 10 seconds. I pushed him off me, and that was it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't even know what my sexuality really was at that time. I didn't know a lot about sexuality, and being gay or LGBTQ or anything like that was non-existent at that time. And if you were, then you're going to get made fun of, beat up, harassed, and all that kind of stuff. So I always had to repress that. So I just kept it to myself. It happened. I left it at that. Nothing ever happened after that. And it was about 6 months later that it was brought up. And because I didn't bring it up and I didn't say something about it first, then I was the aggressor. I became the aggressor of the case. And they took that and they ran with it, and they made it seem like it was this big old gigantic thing. And they put me in the newspapers, and they tried to ask the whole community, because I come from Eastern Washington, which if Eastern Washington is a very small country type setting over there, very Republican, and they were just out to get somebody, and I was that somebody. And so they were trying to get more victims. There was no victims because obviously that was my one thing that I ever did. And so they couldn't find anything else. So they came in, and my lawyer came in one time, and he said, if you don't plead guilty, because I was fighting it, because obviously I'm not the aggressor. It wasn't me that went to him. He came to me, and they said, we don't believe you. No, nobody in their right mind would do that. I said, okay, it's the truth. He came in one day to the jail and told me, he said, if you don't plead guilty to this crime, we'll get you SOSA, which is a sentence alternative for sexual offenders, and it gets you out and into treatment and stuff like that. And I just wanted to get out of that jail because I was already being abused in there by the corrections officers and other inmates. So I just wanted to get out of there. So I said, okay, I will plead guilty as long as I get out this week. And they're like, you will. I said, okay. So we went in for sentencing, and the judge looked at me and he says, I've sentenced many offenders, but never a kid. He's especially with this kind of crime. And they charged me with the highest crime you can get in the state, which is rape of a child in the first degree, which it should never have been rape of a child in the first degree, because there was one, no rape, and number two, it was not a violent crime. But so they charged me with that. And he said, unfortunately, because you're so young, you've never had any type of ties in the community. You've never really held a real job. You have no money. Your family's very poor. I can't do anything. I can't let you out on SOSA. You'll fail. And I said, and I'm just standing there as a kid. I don't know what to say. I know nothing about the legal system. My lawyer's not speaking up for me. He's not fighting for me. He doesn't really care. And so the judge says, unfortunately, I have to send you to adult prison. And that was the end of that. And I remember my whole life ended that day after he said that. I was in such a surreal moment. I was just like, wow, here I was in high school doing great, getting good grades, getting ready to think about college and things like that eventually. And here I am heading to prison. And even all my friends in school were just like, this isn't Josh. This isn't him. Everybody was just in shock. And I could only think how embarrassed or ashamed I was to let everyone down. So that's the gist of that. And then they held me for a few more months, and then they finally did the final sentencing, and away to adult prison I went.
Was it a private prison? Because often judges get bribes to funnel people into private prison so they can make more money. Was this a private prison or a public prison?
This was a state facility prison. Yeah, it wasn't private. We don't have any private prisons. We have some private jails here in the state of Washington. Most of the time, they'll send people out to other states to the private prisons. But I believe Department of Corrections in Washington has stopped doing that because of the issues that have come up because of that. But yeah, it was a public prison. It was our Washington State Department of Corrections. It
occurs to me that there are in this society populations that they decide are surplus, that they can throw away. And they're usually people of color. Often it's people with a sexuality that for whatever reason the establishment decides they don't want. And people certainly with no money, because if you had money, you wouldn't go anywhere near this. And so that it is a whole throwaway of a population that is victimized and then stigmatized as if they deserve it. And so that it's a class injury as well as a racial injury. And so that it's triply terrible. I'm so sorry that you were thrown here as a kind of candidate for abuse. And of course, if you weren't a person of noble character, you would have gotten there an abuser if you weren't one to begin with. How did you keep your decency?
I think sometimes my mom always says, she said, you were born with just some type of energy that just kept you going. Because I could never have made it through what you made it through. And I must have something in me that allowed me to keep going, because there were so many people that I knew in there that committed suicide along the way because they just couldn't do it. It's just so dark and gloomy and lonely. And I just believe I had something in me that allowed me to keep going. And still today, something's telling me, keep fighting, fight back. You need to speak out and tell your truth. Because 6 years ago, I couldn't have done this. I was labeled with a shame, and I felt like a leper of society. Or just like nobody wants to hear my story. Why would anybody want to listen to me? Why would anybody care? But something in me just keeps driving me to say, no, you need to tell your story and you need to stand up for those that don't have a voice, that are going through exactly what you're going through, because they, someone to look up to and say, hey, I can get through this. I can get out of this. I can begin to live a normal life, or try to live a normal life.
At some point during your time there, did that seem impossible, or did you have sort of something in your mind about, when I get out, I'm going to do X, Y, Z? Or like, how did you keep your eyes on the horizon, as it were?
I didn't have a plan to think that I was going to be in the position I'm in now. I was just going day by day, pretty much. I did have some family support as far as letters and people to call, and that helped me get through a lot of it. But even then, that was a tease, because it's so I get a little freedom by talking to you on the phone, but then I hang up and I'm back in this nightmare. So it messed me up sometimes, to point where I didn't even want to call my family and talk with them. And they didn't understand that. And I had to try to explain it to them that, hey, every time I talk with you or you come visit me, I want to go home with you. I want to get out of here. This is a nightmare. And I didn't want to really indulge what was actually going on behind the scenes, because I didn't want them to worry, and I didn't want them to call and make complaints, because then that would make it harder for me. So a lot of things I just had to keep to myself. But I knew that I didn't know if I'd ever make it out of there sometimes, because there was some really bad days. And I was thinking, oh, I'm probably not going to make it home, or I hope I make it home. And even the last month before I was released, I was thinking, am I really getting out of here? Are they really going to let me out? Are they really going to let me come home? Or are they let me be a human being? Can I be a human being? What is that like? I've been treated like an animal for the last 7 years. I don't know what it's like to be a human. I don't know what it's like to work, really. I don't know what it's like to pay taxes. There was a lot of stresses. But yeah, it wasn't until I got out that I started getting that drive to say, hey, I need to do something more. I can't keep hiding. I can't keep staying to myself and not having friends and not having a social life and being part of the community.
The class factor is so enraging that had you had the money for a lawyer, who now talk about equal justice for the lawyer, it costs about $500 an hour to get a decent lawyer. So wait a minute. So that you're shunted treated criminally. You are criminally treated, and you somehow manage to hold on, which is miraculous, to some kind of moral compass that saved you from being a criminal, even though they treated you like one. That's the miracle in your case. It really is. And you, rather than be ashamed, my God, you really have something wonderful about you.
Thank you.
Maybe this is a side, but you're talking about the experience obviously being very close to a nightmare. I'm wondering how sleep worked for you. Did you manage to sleep well? Did you get weird dreams? Was that a refuge? Like, how does that work? Because I know that it's such a foundational thing that we all need. If you don't get sleep, everything just doesn't work. Everything descends. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering how sleep works in prison, how it worked for you. There were significant dreams or anything like that may have been useful or comforting, or was it just you're in one nightmare, you fall asleep and you go into another nightmare? Like, how did that all work?
During the day, obviously, when you're out and about, running around and trying to either go to school or you're going to some type of job that pays you 40 cents an hour or whatever it is you're doing, that kind of stresses you out because you're constantly moving. So when you do go back to your cell and the lights go out and everything starts to get quiet, you do pretty much pass out. And I was blessed for that, because I try to keep myself busy in there. So that way I did go to sleep, and that way I didn't have to go to Medline and get some type of medicine to make me sleep like everybody else was doing. But when I would fall asleep, I would always have dreams of the little bit of life I had when I was out here before, like going to my grandma's farm, or going fishing, or riding my bike, or things like that. So I would have dreams like that, and that would help give me that strength to make it another day and another day. And sometimes I would even have dreams where it wasn't even a life I lived, but it was a beautiful place that I would go to, and it was just full of peace and serenity and nature, which I love nature. because you don't get that in there. Being out in a forest by myself is just, it's very comforting. And I'd have dreams like that. And that would help get me through the next day and then through the next day. But then there were some times where you would have a night terror, because at that time they could throw you in segregation, which is 23 hours a day locked in your cell and then 1 hour out to shower and use the phone. And they would throw you in there just under investigation, or say somebody doesn't like me and says, oh, he's going to get killed. They'll take me right off the main line, put me in the hole under investigation for 6 months in the hole. And so when I would get out of there, then sometimes I'd have some night terrors of going back in there, or them forgetting about me, or the prison shutting down. I'd have these terrors sometimes when I would think, oh my gosh, we could have an earthquake or a natural disaster, and the prison guards are just going to leave, and here I am in the hole, and now I'm going to die in this little tiny room because everybody's going to forget about me. Who's going to care about a prisoner sitting in a cell when everybody's trying to survive? I'd always have those terrors like that, nightmares like that. It's just,
Oh, wow.
Most countries and all the other Western European countries, seclusion like that, isolation, is against the law. It's considered torture. Solitary confinement is defined as torture, and it is torture because we are social animals, and depriving you of sociality is disastrous.
So recently we had a guest, a veteran, and he was talking about that part of the thing about being in the military is, to a certain extent, they take care of you, right? They feed you, and if you've got problems, physical problems, they can address that, all that kind of stuff. So there's that huge sort of social aspect to it, that you potentially have friends as well as enemies. And I guess it's a perverse question, but was any of that stuff in prison, like coming out the other end? I assume it's complete relief that you're away from it, but was there anything like that had a parallel with the military thing, where actually there was something in there that was positive or that you missed?
I thought, if you would have asked me this a few years after I got it, I probably have all sorts of things I could say, like people I thought were my friends, or people I thought that were comrades, or whatever. But now being out so long and knowing that those people really weren't my friends, that they weren't my comrades, we were just people stuck in a place at the same time, and we made it what we made it during that time, because I'm not connected with them anymore. We don't talk. I don't have any association with them. The one thing that stands out to me the most, I don't miss, but I did enjoy while I was in there, was a program they had in there at that time called Kairos. And it was a spiritual Christian program. And these people come in from all these churches all around the state, and they bake cookies for us, and they feed us, and they just shower us with love. And that's something that is unheard of in that in prison. So it was the best program I had ever taken part in while I was in there. And I did it almost every year when they had it there. And these ladies would come in, they were so wonderful, and they just showed us God's love. And it was just, it definitely opened my eyes to see that there are people out here that actually care about what goes on in there, and they take time out of their lives to come in and share that with us, and let us know that we're not alone and that we are loved. And that is something I think of a lot years later, and that is something that was positive. And I wish they still had it in there, but they got rid of that program.
Wow. Why did they get rid of it?
Oh, no.
Once COVID hit, that was pretty much, DOC finds any reason to get rid of a wonderful program for any reason. So COVID was a big reason on that. And ever since then, they just don't have it anymore. They say they're understaffed, or they just don't have the resources to facilitate something like that anymore. But they do it in other states. I think it's all around the country, because there was a prison in Australia that sent us a bunch of cards at the time telling us they love us too, and that they're there for us. So I think they do it all over the world, but they just don't do it here in Washington State anymore.
There is a specific church that is associated with it, or is it various different churches?
I think it's various different churches. It's non-denominational, but it's Christian-based. And it's just a whole bunch of different churches. And they meet at different churches in the area of the prison. And they just overtake that church, and they use it to get the cookies coordinated and all the food made there. And then they bring all the food in, and they pretty much just pamper us for the whole weekend. It was one of the best moments in there. It almost made you feel like you're free, because they got the guitars and the music playing, and you're away from all the inmates and all the corrections officers, and it was just a wonderful experience.
how did they really show you were loved? Just through the music and the food, or did they treat you a certain way or talk to you a certain way?
Yeah, their teachings were one. They taught us God's love, agape. They taught us that everybody can change and be renewed. You're not your past. You're your present and your future. We would break up and go to different little sections, little places. Maybe we'll have one lady or one guy in our group that's from the outside, and he'll sit there and he'll talk with us, and we'll have breakout groups and things like that where we can learn more about ourselves and learn more about love and being able to respect one another. And it was a lot of great self-help. We would sing, we would hug, lots of hugs. And that's not something you get in prison. Women would hug us. And at first, it was very uncomfortable for me because, obviously I've been in there so long. And then to have somebody hug me, that's crazy. I felt so uncomfortable. But after going through the program a few times, I was like, I love this. I love being hugged and I love hugging.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's one of the things that stuck with me that the last time we spoke to you was the power of cake. So it's nice to hear the fuller picture, as it were, because obviously they were bringing biscuits and cakes by the sounds of it, but that it was surrounded by all this other stuff as well is great to hear. But it's tragic and or indicative of the times we live in. We don't have resources for care or love. That's the most wild thing. What's the point? What's the point in any of this if there isn't time for care? So the idea that program was cancelled is terrifying.
I must say that a film by Michael Moore, Who Should We Invade Next? And it's about going to different countries and learning from them. And they have an episode from a prison in Sweden where the point is not to punish and hurt, but to help people get back on their feet. And so everything is done to help people feel better. And then there was also a program designed by Susie Schwartz in a book called Dreams from the Monster Factory, where she, who was a lawyer, got sick of helping people get off and then they go back to prison again, to redesign prisons. So there are no little cells that you're always locked up in. There are free spaces. Everybody eats together. Everyone has to go into therapy, males and females separately, and talk about their past and confront each other. And they reduced recidivism going back to prison by 75%, and they discontinued the program. So what I'm struck by is how punitive this is, that it has nothing to do with helping you become a wonderful part of a functioning society, but actually hurting you all the time. And I wonder why you think America doesn't try to help people who are in trouble, but just hurt them. What sense did you make of that?
Yeah, the only thing I could think of was that they just wanted to punish you. There was never give from correctional part. There was a lot of organizations that would come in and do a lot of different things, but they just wouldn't let them in, or they wouldn't let them do it, or if they did it a couple of weeks, that would be it. They see something good and they want to destroy it. I don't know how the Department of Corrections is working now inside. I talk to a lot of people, obviously, that get almost every week to come to us, and it almost sounds like it's still the same. They try to make it seem like it's like they're doing so much out here to the public, but when you really get dived down into it, they're just still the same as they were back when I did time, or back in the 70s or whatever. You have that frame of mind from the correctional officer standpoint where they're militarized. They get these people from right out of the military, get in there, become a corrections officer, and it's all about punish, treat you like crap, maybe start a little drama between the races, because a lot of them play games with the inmates in there, and it's a real sick cycle. The outlook on it is very disturbing to me still. It was disturbing to me then because I couldn't understand how somebody in the free world where you get everything you want gets to come into prison, but yet you come to prison with a negative mindset and a negative attitude, and then treat people like they're animals and wonder why these people that you're treating like animals react to you as an animal. And I've seen so many corrections officers get beat up because people just get tired of it. You can't push somebody against a wall or push somebody against something for so long until they want to react or fight back. So it's a sick cycle in there. And I do believe it's still happening today, just with the people that I've spoke to coming out of prison all the time. It sounds like it's the same cycle in there.
I do too. It's the same. I live in New York, and Rikers Island has I think it's 30 people have died since January in there, and people horribly mistreated. But I wonder, what's the social point of it? Is the social point creating social conditions that are so punitive that people do things that are illegal and then you can brand them as criminals and throw them away because you have a surplus population? Or is it to rent you out at 40 cents an hour? Because a lot of money is made that way. I think it's the point of not trying to rehabilitate people who've made a mistake. Why should they do that? Other societies don't do that so badly.
I just think it's just bred in there. I don't know why we do that or why it's there, but it's there. And until we either fix the system or fix the issue, it's always going to be there. You could put a different name on it or paint it with a different color, but it's still going to be what it is until you fix the root of the problem. And that's, I think people in general, I think society in general needs to be reevaluated and looked at, because these are people coming from the free world going in there and then making that world even worse than what it already is.
Yeah, what it reminds me of is if, all these other countries that have a more civilized way of treating people, like the Scandinavian countries, they all have socialism. They all have, in addition to a system where you make money by getting somebody to work for you and ripping them off because you make more than you give them, they have all sorts of social programs because they believe that the way to have a sane society is to treat people well. And I think we don't have that. After the McCarthy era in the 50s, where they incarcerated and deported and punished the left, calling them communists or socialists were fellow travelers, and or leftists, kicked them out of the unions, kicked them out of their jobs. We don't have an antidote to that kind of greed. We don't have something against that poison. And so that we are a much less civilized country that takes care of its people less. Because what's the point of throwing people away? It's sick. And I think it's symptomatic of a sick part of our society and a neglect of people caring.
Well, to the extent that it's children as well, I guess the obvious one is putting kids amongst with adults must just be absolutely terrifying.
Now they don't send juveniles here in the state to the adult facilities. They do let them stay in the juvenile system until they're 18. Then at 18 they go up. But even at 18, you're still a kid, especially if you've been in juvenile for the last 2-3 years, and then you go right up to adults. And the adults are waiting. They know when the kids are coming, and they like to pick them out and see which one is going to be the person that's going to go and fight somebody for them, or they're going to punk them out, or they're going to turn them into a sex slave, or whatever it is they're going to do with these people. So it's just changed a little, but it needs a whole lot of change. I don't believe in incarceration at all, really. I don't see it as being a positive in any way. I don't see it does nothing but create a sense of false security for the public, and the public doesn't understand the truth behind it. They read what they want and they see what they want on the news because it's always the negativity. They never talk about all the good stuff that does happen when people get out. They always talk about the negative, or this person's doing this or that. So yeah, I don't think it's changed. I just think it's been shifted a little bit. We need to, as a community or society, we need to be able to look at each individual person and try to assist them in whatever it is they need, if it's mental health, if it's treatments of any kind or any sort, versus institutionalization or incarceration. Because with that, you can create somebody that's worse. So you put somebody in there, they have two choices. You're either going to be the animal, or you're going to try to not become the animal and hang on to whatever humanness you have until you get out, which is what I was able to do, which I'm blessed for, because I could have fell right into the rest of them and became this worse person, and then got out and hated society and went around and created more crime. But I didn't. I decided that that's not my life. That's not who I am. I'm not that person. I wasn't even this person that got in trouble. That's not me. I'm not a pedophile. I'm not a predator. I'm not a person that jumps out of bushes and takes people. That's not me. I was a kid that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And unfortunately, ended up having to carry the cross. And I did that for 7 years. And I'm still carrying it today with the lifetime registration because I was tried as an adult. So I got the adult sentence. And it would have cost me over $5,000 to $6,000 just to get off the registry. And I don't have that kind of money. Who has $6,000 just sitting around to give a lawyer?
Right.
And then, so it's a sick cycle. But I do have a wonderful human being named Claire Wilson, who's a state senator who has been the first senator and the first elected official to listen to me, and that actually stands up for people like me. And she's done a lot of great work here in the state of Washington. She's one of the leaders of the new bill that's going into effect that's going to allow people getting out to get $300 gate money instead of $40. It was $40 since 1970 or something like that.
Yeah, I think the point, if I'm trying to think, why do that to human beings? I think partly it's to distract from the crimes that are really taking place every day, people being cheated out of the value of their labor, people being shunted into neighborhoods where the conditions of life are no good, where the air is bad, where the water is bad, where they can't afford healthy food. And those are real crimes. To make crime an interpersonal matter and create a group of people that you punish and mistreat, rather than look at how people should be treated in the society and try to achieve it. You create these false criminals and treat them terribly rather than looking at the top. But they have the money and they have the means. And if you hire a cybersecurity person, they can scrub your background. And so that I think it's a social to criminalize the individual and not look at the social crimes that are happening that create terrible trouble and troubled people. It's a
disciplinary force, right? Whether homelessness or whether prison, it all functions as a disciplinary force in capitalism to a certain degree.
Yeah, and it distracts people from the capitalists at the top. For example, 3 men own 50% of the wealth of the whole country of America. How did they get that? Look at Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men in the world. They have the worst, most unhealthy conditions at the Amazon warehouses where they're most likely to get hurt. He's a criminal. He's making a bundle hurting people. And he could do that service without hurting people. This is outrageous.
In the popular imagination, do you think that there's ever been any sort of real depiction of what prison is like in fiction, in entertainment form? Because I think lots of people are aware that prison isn't a holiday. People are definitely aware, oh man, I wouldn't want to go to prison, which sort of pays to Ikoi's point about it being a disciplinary force. But I'm just wondering if there's anything that really captures the sort of nuance of all the things that have been spoken about. I'm wondering if that exists. But I guess probably you didn't want to watch prison TV shows whilst in prison. It's probably no good answer.
I do watch them now, though, which is interesting. Even my mom goes, why are you watching Locked Up? I was like, I don't know. It's like a sense of, I don't know. It's almost like comforting in a weird way.
Well, it's your reality that they're showing. That's important. Your reality revealed.
I also think there's a degree of safe judgmental distance, right? Like the parallel, and this is trash, I'm talking, but the parallel would be these reality shows, particularly relationship-based ones, because you can just watch these couples just be insane in a sort of comfortable distance and just laugh at it. And maybe there's some uncomfortable things where you're like, yeah, I can maybe recognize some things there that translate. But I think presumably that with the prison show, it's the same thing. It's that shit's at a distance. And if I want to push the button to switch it off, I can. But you can make judgments and reflections without it being directly affecting.
I remember reading about Rikers Island. It cost $60,000 a year to put people in those horrible conditions. And they could be sent to college and also put up somewhere for less money. Somewhere, somebody's making an enormous amount of money by torturing people this way, as well as distracting them from the bigger crimes being committed against them. So I think that also has to, I don't know who's making the money. I've really never studied what they call the studies of the prison industrial complex and how lucrative it is. But somebody whenever something disgusting is happening, somebody's making money. So I don't know how, but somewhere that's no doubt the case.
Yeah, maybe I'm having a stroke right now, but am I correct in thinking in our last conversation that you mentioned your family's background is First Nations, or am I off there?
Yeah.
So did that play a role at all during your time in prison? Was that like an identifying thing, like a target, or was it a point of pride, or was it just not relevant?
For me, because you can't hide that I'm obviously Indigenous, I look at going in there, all the natives, they would see me and pull me up and say, "Are you native?" Blah, blah, blah. Yes. But then they find out that I'm obviously not straight. And for them inside, it's faux pas, or it's a stigma to have a gay or LGBTQ plus person in the circle. So they would bar me from drumming. They would bar me from singing. They would bar me from beating. They would bar me from all of it, to the point where everybody felt uncomfortable with me being there. So I got to the point where I said, I don't need you. I have myself. I know who I am. I look obviously more Indigenous than any of y'all people sitting around a drum. So I can just do my own thing because I have that in my heart. So I would just buy my own beads. I would do my own stuff with myself. There were some natives that didn't stand for that and would come hang out with me and spend time with me. But the majority were, we're tough and rough and we're men and we can't have a sissy around us making us look weak. So That's how. Yeah.
So they were doing that for their own sort of self-defense, as it were. You were excluded because that would have made them a target.
Correct.
Wow.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking, especially your own people. And still today, I have a hard time connecting with them even now, because I see how they treat other LGBTQ plus people. I have a lot of trans friends that are Native American as well, and they've been kicked out of circles and not allowed to sweat and just a lot of stuff. And it's definitely, I don't understand it, coming from where we came from, what we've lost, to do that to our own people. It's just sickening to me. Yeah, it's just, so I don't really associate myself with any groups like that to this day, because of how I was treated there and because how I see they treat people out here as it stands today. So I am just myself. I always tell people I am me. I am Josh. I'm Indigenous, and that's that.
You'd think that 55 million people, conservatively, 55 million Native Americans were murdered. And it seems like we've been victimizing Native Americans since that's the poorest group in the United States. But that people wouldn't stick together and embrace one another, having been so victimized by the outside world, is the triumph of pitting people against one another in hatred in order to deny the solidarity that has a chance of winning. It's so sad. It's just pathetic to me that people would do that. People in the society who are getting screwed and don't band together because of stupid prejudices. But even within the smaller and so victimized group, it's so sad that they've been allowed to be divided from one another. It's just sick.
As far as I understand it, from things I read previously, years ago, I guess now, we had Dr. Jeffrey Anslus, and he did a lot of work with First Nations, I think, young offenders. I think it was young offenders. Might have been full-grown adults as well, in prison and stuff like that. And it sounds like the numbers are disproportionately huge for First Nations youth. And I assume it's just another example of the way the whole thing works.
Yeah, in there, there's not many Indigenous people. There's maybe 40 or 50 at one prison, and then maybe 40 or 50 at another, and maybe 20 in another, maybe 10 in another. So I think that's where they get the idea that they can't have any weakness around them because they stand out and they have to protect themselves. And if they bring somebody like me in, then that shows everybody else in the other cars, oh, look, they got a sissy with them. Oh, that makes them all sissy. Oh, they must all be doing that. And then it makes them look weak in their eyes. Because, in prison, it's like prison politics is what we would call it. And it's got its own world, and it's sick. It really is. It's disgusting the way people think in there. And it's definitely bred. It's bred in when you first get there. They pound it into you. Don't say bitch. Don't say punk. Don't snitch. Don't tell. You got to walk with your head up. You can't. It's just, it's a very sick way of having to live. But it's definitely bred in there. And everybody turns out that way. Now, when you get out, you can slowly get rid of that. It takes years. I didn't say bitch for years after I got out. I was so terrified. Now I'm just like, bitch, please. So I've been able to let that go. But it is. It's definitely, it's a way of life in there. And it's not, I don't call it a way of life, because life is not living. It's a way of stagnation. It's a way of going backwards, almost turning into an animal, super animalistic.
A lot of times it seems like in prison, some of the power dynamics that are papered over by politeness in society is very center-forward and raw.
As an alternative, they could think we are an embattled population.
That's a lot easier said than done.
Yes, it is.
Not to say that it can't be done, but you also have an entire infrastructure and the correctional officers reinforcing that, right?
Yep.
That it's not just the prisoners, but there are multiple levels of reinforcement happening in that population to promote and carry over this kind of environment.
But on the other hand, you're letting that system define you, which, is pretty terrible. You reject that system, it's hurting you every day, and you're allowing its definitions to triumph. Whoa.
Yeah.
One of the things that I made a note of, you said they see something good and they want to destroy it. And I thought that's definitely something that could describe any individual maybe you've met in your life, but it's like that's a mindset that's created by the environment. I'm just wondering, when it comes to, how did you protect the things that were good?
I would say that keeping the good to yourself as much as you can. With myself, I'm very personable. I'm very people oriented. I've always been that way. I was born that way. I just love sociality. I love talking to people. I love meeting new people. But in there, you have to learn how to repress that in a certain way, because not everybody is going to be friendly. Not everybody has your best interests at heart. And it's usually 9 times out of 10, they do not. So if somebody comes up to you, hey, buddy, what's going on? Wants to be your friend. 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to do something either bad to you, or they got something planned for you, or there's some type of underlying, idea that they have, which is usually always negative or not positive. But I kept as much as I could as the good in. But there was people that I felt comfortable with here and there that I was able to be myself with and talk with them freely, which was nice. But I usually save that for when I would call my family, or they would come to visit, or things like that. So there wasn't a lot of time to where you could just actually be your true, authentic self in there, because people will feed on that. They see kindness, they see a person that's loving and caring, and they will eat that up. They're like monsters. It feels like.
For some, kindness is weakness to prey on.
That's right. Yeah, and they do. They prey on it all the time in there. I've seen so many kind, loving people come in there and they eat them right up. Until the point where they either commit suicide or they're always in PC, protected custody, because mentally they just cannot do it. And luckily, I had a mindset that allowed me to maneuver through a lot of the stuff, so that way I could not have to be in protective custody, and I didn't have to be fully fake. But there were times where I had to play the role of quiet and stoic and repressed. And then if you have stuff, that's another thing. If you have things, if you got clothes in it, or if you got a store, which is food or a commissary, they prey on that too, especially if you're not part of the group. And I wasn't part of a group. So they would always try to think that they could do that with me. And so there was a lot of confrontation, a lot of me trying to talk my way out of things, so that way it wouldn't come to that point. So it was very mentally stressful.
Especially as somebody that was still young and developing. That must have been especially taxing.
Yeah. How did something like drumming not make you a target?
You mean if I'm not going to drumming and to the event?
Because it's like a thing, right? Like it's something you're doing, and it's something that I imagine is good. And so how does that, if you're doing that, does that not, do people zero in on that? Isn't that something like, oh, there's something they enjoy, let me see if I can screw it up? Like, how do you navigate an environment where you can't really show that maybe you enjoy certain things or certain things are important to you?
With drumming, they would do that in the kitchen, in the chow halls where we would eat. They would do that at a private time. So people wouldn't be able to go out there unless you were invited by the circle, which is the group of natives or people that were in the group would allow you to come out. So they would do that in private. Sweat lodge, that was in private. Beating, that was usually in the chapel, and that was at their own time. So other races or other people couldn't go. But for myself, I didn't drum because there was only one drum and I didn't partake in that. But beading, like you could get a curio or a incel hobby permit, and then you can have beads mailed in. So I would bead, but people understood because of the way I held myself, people respected me in that way to say, hey, he's walking his road his own way, and we respect that. And I never had anybody disrespect me or try to take things like my beating and things like that. If anything, they were very in awe of the artwork that I was able to do or the things I was able to create. And I made a lot of stuff for people. So maybe that also made people at ease or not want to come and take my little piece of happiness away. So I didn't come across that as far as in that way.
So the prison did make allowances essentially for people to have their own sort of private time to do things, as it were.
Correct. Yeah.
When you say you gave away some of the beaded things, how did you give them away without looking weak and kind?
I just wouldn't give it to anybody. Obviously, I'm not giving it to somebody that's like being a pressure or somebody that's a bully or somebody that wants to be a tough guy. Usually it's just the elders. I used to hang out with a lot of older people just because I like older souls. I've always been drawn to that. So most of the people in the units or the places I was at were older. And I would hang out with them and I'd just hang out with them and they would share coffee or stuff with me in the morning. And then we'd hang out in the yards or things like that. And then after time, we became, I call it like associates, because friends, I don't know, because we just didn't keep in touch after that. But we were definitely associates. And I would make something extra, or I would have, I'd know what they like, and I knew it was their birthday. And I'm a giver. I like to give things. I like to have big birthdays and celebrations. So I would give them like a medallion or a keychain or something that would represent them. So I always like to go out of my way for people that show the same kind of kindness to me. But usually there was never any racists that really cared for that kind of stuff. They were more involved in people getting off the chain and getting them to send cigarettes into the hole for their partners that are in the hole, or they're out there looking somebody that's told on them, so they're going to stab them, or they're looking at the bigger picture. So usually I fell under the radar, which was great because I didn't all that other stuff was too mind-boggling and taxing to my mental state. Even though I was around it, I tried to pretend and put my blinders on that it wasn't really happening when it really was happening around me.
It sounds like a wonderful art form.
How many you weren't the only juvenile in prison at the time. How many cohorts did you have?
When I got to the youth offender program at Clallam Bay Correction Center, which was in 1999, there were about, there was one unit and there were 3 pods. One pod was used for the whole or IMU, and there was about anywhere from 4 to 5 to 6 people in there at a time. But the other pods that had the population of the juveniles, there was about, 3 tiers high, 10 tiers, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, about 100 and maybe 110 of us in the unit.
You have contact with the other youth prisoners who were thrown in with adults?
Today? Or back then?
Back then.
The other juveniles? Yeah, they would have us in high school. They had a high school program there that we would attend every day. And then we also had a PE or whatever they call it, gym time, where we'd go out and run and do things in the yard all together. And then we would also all eat together. And then we would also sometimes we do evenings, like meetings and things like that. If you want to do AA, they'd have a little AA meeting within the unit you could go out to. So we could all do that too. But it was really restricted. They wanted to keep us as much as they could away from the adults, which really didn't happen much because we always see them every time we'd walk somewhere or go somewhere, they'd be trying to talk to all of
Did you
us.
have any solidarity with them that was sustaining, or were they as bad as the rest?
Some of them were okay, but like I said, if they're being nice or they're being kind, sometimes you don't know if that's true or not. So you don't know if they're grooming you, you never know in there. It was so hard to trust people. It was really hard to trust people.
And how's that sort of developed then once you get out? Is there a process of just going, okay, how do I learn or relearn to trust people? Because it sounds to me like you had friends and family that would visit and you could do that with them. So you always had the capacity for it, continually refreshed. But once you get out, how do you then expand that? Or do you not still? Are you very measured about who you choose as friends? Or do you feel like it had an effect on any of that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah. It's almost been, 15, 16, 17 years since I've been out. And it still affects me. I see it in day-to-day life at times. Now, when I first got out, I wanted to trust people. And, you're out and free and you're thinking everybody's nice and kind out here. It's not like prison. But then you start to see that there is a little bit of that mentality in society. People can pretend to be something they're not and then find out later that it wasn't what it was. So it did throw me back here and there, and it set me back to the point where I didn't trust a lot of people. I had a hard time trusting people. I kept to myself. I just worked and came home. I didn't want relationships or friendships because I was afraid that they would turn into that, or they would just be not sincere. Or because at one time I thought I was the only sincere human being in this world, the only person that could actually be truthful and sincere with the friendship. But as I've gotten older and I've been out here longer, it takes time. And it's a day-by-day process. We call it transitioning or re-entering. You transition and re-enter all your life, especially after incarceration. It's a day-by-day, moment by moment. And I think slowly I am releasing a lot of that and letting a lot of that go, and just knowing that, hey, not everybody's going to be what they are, and that's okay. I just need to learn how to get through it and just be like, okay, then that's what that was, and not say I'm going to shut down and not talk to nobody and not have no friends anymore because of one person or two people. Because out here, you can obviously pick and choose who you want to be around, and just surround yourself with people that celebrate you versus just want to destroy you. Yeah, it's definitely something I work on, and I still work on it today. But I think I'm getting a whole lot better from when I first got out from incarceration. So I think I'm doing a lot better with that. But it's a life process.
Yeah, but that's a great point. To hang out with people that celebrate you and they're not trying to destroy you, I think is a good little heuristic, a good thing to... Sounds, when you say it, it sounds obvious, but it's really true. It's a good rule. Yeah. Sorry, Harriet.
No, it's a true across the board. From everyone, we have to stay away from people who need to undermine us. There's a lot of them out there because capitalism is a cruel society, and the American empire is losing, and people are being shafted, and there isn't a place for them to go. A party that offers hope and solidarity of all people together. And so they often just get very selfish and mean. It's a very bad time in America, really. And so you do have to take care to be with the people who nurture you and who you can nurture and have the luxury of nurturing both ways.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those things about age as well, or getting older, that a lot of people really get psychologically beaten up every year they're on Earth, right? And you see the effects of that at one point, probably this person was an excited, kind of wide-eyed child. And then at a certain point, everything sucks, everything's shit. And they may have come to that conclusion through completely understandable experiences, but it's like none of us want to be that person, I don't think. And I think it's really interesting what you're saying, that the people you would hang out with in the prison a lot of the time were the older people. I just wondered, like you said, they weren't friends, maybe associates or whatever, but did they have any of those qualities? Was there a sort of bitterness about their experiences, or was there some lightness? What was it you were able to maybe share with them?
I enjoyed them because of their stories. A lot of them were lifers, so they're never getting out. They were probably down in the 70s and 80s. A lot of them were probably passed away now. And I just enjoyed their stories, to hear what they did out in the world, because I never got to experience that. So I got to live through their stories. And it would take me out of there sometimes, especially when they would talk about getting on their motorcycles and heading into the sunset and all this and that, and going to the beaches. Never done that before. Or going on a vacation, or just all sorts of different stories, or being able they had like a softer side of being. It's like they were still, don't mess with them because they got life and they have nothing to lose, but yet they still can set the tone as being kind and understanding people. They didn't let the system turn them into an animal or something that isn't what they were. They really embraced humanity as much as they could, and they were really smart. They read a lot of books. They inspired me to want to read. They inspired me to want to get into education and things like that. Yeah, they really uplifted me in a lot of ways and allowed me to feel like I was part of something and I was a human being again. And yeah, I just enjoyed the time that I got to have with those people.
I think also older people have so much that they've been through, but very few people who want to listen. So it must have been nice for them that a younger person was actually listening as you were.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's been really wonderful to talk to you, but I have to go. So goodbye. Thank you so much.
It's good to hear that there's, even in old age, there's a sense of defiance, maybe, right? Because it appears to me that imprisonment is maybe the extreme example, but that you need the defense, you need that wall that comes up to protect the things that are good. And it sounds to me like those lifers, or the kind of older prisoners, that if to have navigated and to have somehow stayed who they were, required a certain amount of defense. You can call it strength, but it is definitely, they figured out a way to survive and all that kind of stuff. And it's clearly, that's how you do get through a process like prison, is that you have to find some way of protecting what is good and what's you. So even though it's probably an experience no one should have to go through, it sounds like you went through the ultimate test and you weathered it, you got through it, which is, I don't know if I could do the same, but it's, at the root, it sounds to me like on one hand, you're protecting something that's good, but also there must be an element of defiance, right? It's fuck you, I'm not going to get crushed by this.
Yeah. It's a definite fine balance. You have to have that drive to say, hell with this, I'm getting through this shit. I'm not giving up. I have family I need to come home and see. I have a life that I want to live, that I don't even know what it is to live, but I want to live it. I want to experience life. I want to eat ice cream again.
Yeah, that's good.
What was the age of the youngest? Do you remember when you were in prison?
13 was the youngest that we had in there that I remember.
13
years old. Yeah. I thought I was young when I went in there, and I was like, how old are you? Jeez.
Wow. That
was the era where they were just bumping all the juveniles up, bumping them all up. It was, I don't know what the legislation was on it, but they were just, they were piling us in there. Every week we had 3 or 4 new ones. And I'm like, geez. And they kept getting younger and younger. And I'm just like, wow. And they had to stay in that youth offender program until they turned 18. Then when you turn 18, they give you some matches and tell you, there you go. Now you're back. You're in population with the adults. Oh, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then they send you out to the dark.
Do you think there's anything in the stuff that we've covered so far, have we missed out something that you feel like is important to communicate or get across to listeners?
Just that he has a story. Everybody's individual. Everybody's a human being. Just because they have a label that was thrown on them doesn't make them who they are. That doesn't make them who they are. Everybody changes. Everybody transforms into something different and can. Yeah, just get involved with your local reentry programs or people that are coming into the society and just support them any way you can, because they really need it. We aren't what we're labeled as. We are who we are today and going forward. And I just wish more people would celebrate that versus just wanting to throw away the key and forget about the person and then expect to be okay when they get out, but it doesn't work like that. It takes a whole community. It takes a whole group of people, society, to be able to embrace these people when they're coming home, because they're coming to everybody's community. They're releasing everywhere. So it's our job to be able to assist them and support them coming home. So that way they know they're loved, they're cared for, and that they can change into a productive part of society and the community at large. So that's what I'd like everybody to remember.
Yeah. And that everyone needs a hug now and again. I think that's absolutely an amazing story. And it's, how something like that can be reinstated would be an interesting little mission.
Yeah, I think it's a contradiction, right? Because conservatives are the ones that often push for the more punitive policies. But at the same time, one of the odd things about that contradiction is like some of the more religious groups are ones that sometimes have the sense of grace and redemption. Because that's one of the things that I often do find interesting as somebody that's not religious, but that's always had a very strong sense of human beings being dynamic and human beings being capable of change, right? If I didn't have that, I shouldn't be in the field that I'm in. A lot of people especially have this sense of people being a fixed entity. And especially in a negative way, right? That once you are negative labeled something, that like this is your permanent brand for life.
That's right. Yeah.
Again, I think a huge part of why society continues down that path is that ultimately we haven't really figured out a way as a society to deal with and incorporate. Like, how do we deal with harm in a way that's just not shunning?
Yeah.
That is one of the things that people have a really hard time doing, because that's also something that there are multitudes of vast differences, but there are similarities in a rehab environment, right? Where again, the identity of quote unquote being an addict is an individual one, and if somebody wants to identify as that permanently, that's their choice. I have no say here or there, but at the same time, if that's a label that's coerced on people, where it's not a freely chosen identity, right? That it can be a problem.
Oh, yes. Well, especially in society where it's free to research and look up, and then you can get harassed, you can get threatened, and it's just a numerous amount of things. Lose your job, friends don't want to be friends with you because they don't want to be part of that stigma.
And it's also one of those things where so many things, the quote about prison walls not separating the good and the bad people. You know, we do so many things in the name of safety that doesn't actually result in safety for society. This is an unpopular opinion, but I'll stand by it. I don't think the sex offender registry protects anybody.
No, it does not. No, it does not.
Because there's this assumption that if you're on the registry, that you must have been like jumping from dark alleyways to rape strangers. Yeah. Right? That is the concept of how people end up on the sex offender registry list. But it is a huge, like the vast majority of, again, like in the United States, is a justice system where like you get the sentence that you can afford,
exactly.
Which is you get the justice based on the lawyer you can afford. So the vast majority of people on it are on it, one, because they're poor, because they can get proper defense. But there are a lot of people on there whose primary issue is that they have a uncared for mental health condition, that they have cognitive issues, disabilities. Those people are extremely highly make up for that population that ends up on registries. And again, like, what if something leads to the potential homelessness and joblessness and despair? How is that protected?
Yeah, it's not. I always tell people, would you rather all SOs and be homeless and on the streets where you don't know where they're at and don't know what they're doing and living a life of crime and who knows what's going on? Or would you rather them be able to live where they need to live and work where they need to work so they can make a living to be able to be sustainable and then feel like they're part of the human race again? You can't keep throwing them away like they're lepers of society.
It's one of those things where, so much about crime and what we feel as a society about criminals, right? There is this sense that these people, this is who they are. This is their innate true selves, right? Versus, no, any human behavior has a huge aspect of development and societal environmental influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even for a lot of people that often talk about criminal justice reform, the one area where people are really silent and fall silent on is the sex offender registry. Because that is like the one crime that nobody in society really wants to deal with, to the detriment of, even if we were to say that it's not about the offenders, we care about the victim, right? But it's to the detriment of victims. And also, it's one of those things where, again, like these people didn't commit these crimes out of the blue.
Correct.
Things happen. And also, like, what gets labeled a crime is not necessarily like the subjective cut and dry thing is with your case, especially coming from, that must have been harrowing, because being outed in that way as a young person, I can't imagine. It must have been extraordinarily traumatic.
It was definitely traumatic because I was in juvenile hall for I think a week when they bumped me up to adult, and then they put me right in jail with all the other adults. And they knew I was in there for a sex offense, and they were trying to threaten me and fight with me. And the jail staff didn't care. It was just a nightmare. It was a nightmare, and I just wanted to go home. I wanted to go home, and I always kept telling them to send me home. Nothing like this. This is not me. This is not. It's just I felt definitely tormented and traumatized for sure, and I still deal with that today.
Yeah, I would just hearing that was a background too. It's just really heartbreaking. And again, so there is like this, people have this idea that these crimes are cut and dry. And again, what we think of as a crime, right, it's one of those things where, like, back in the day, if you were gay, that was a crime in itself.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why gay bars and gay clubs that there were raids done on them, not for people necessarily taking illicit substances or safety or anything, but to humiliate gay men and gay women at those establishments. And those were socially accepted as these crimes that ruined lives for a long time. I think people always have this assumption that our current idea of whatever things are is like the morally correct position, when morally correct position is something that changes also over time.
Yeah. And I'm hoping in time laws get more understood and fair for people, and that there's more of a step-down program versus a lifetime registration. There shouldn't be lifetime. I don't think there should be a lifetime registration. Everybody can change. Everybody can get better.
And I think there is something to be said for non-punitive therapy. It's one aspect of therapy is that because we live in a punitive system, that it can be the punitive structure in itself. Because I don't know a lot of the details on this, but I remember hearing about therapy for sex registry offenders at one point. I think it was in Boston, but I was listening to this one lawyer talk about some of the major issues with it was that if they wanted to talk about their experience, or if they wanted to talk about some residual or remaining feelings, they couldn't, because that it was punitive and it got them sent back to prison.
My goodness.
And again, like, if you aren't able to talk freely with your therapist, what's the point of treatment?
Yeah.
Right. Because that's one of the aspects that I often, as somebody that has listened to a lot of accounting of that have been stuck in various institutionalized sectors of society, that a lot of times, like, people push for treatment without understanding that, like, a lot of our current treatment models are punitive and coercive, right? And that like the devil is really in the details.
Yeah, you think you're going to get help and help yourself, and then you find out that it's not. It's all about shaming or making you feel worse than you got there. I always tell people I need treatment for the treatment I had.
And it's also just, there was a big article about, instead of going to jail for drugs, that you could go through like these deferment programs, and some of those deferment programs being like really unethical work camps where people weren't really paid any kind of like wage for really horrifying work conditions that they were put through. That it's also, we have this pervasive idea of a certain group of people not deserving ethical treatment.
Notice that they like to make these programs, but they're always programs that have to show some type of extra abuse or extra punishment in some way. It can't just be a program that works wonderfully and everybody likes it and it's a wonderful thing. It has to be something negative in there for it to pass through legislature or through different channels. And it's just, okay, this is interesting. Why does it always have to be negative? Why can't it be a positive, wonderful thing that you're going to provide these people so they can actually change their lives, instead of sending them to a work camp where they're going to feel like they're just beaten down every day, where they just want to say, hell with it, I'll just go to prison. I'd rather go to prison than have to go through this. And that doesn't make no sense. It's just like backwards to me.
Because ultimately we have this idea that you shouldn't treat, like, again, that ethical treatment, like that you can classify people outside of ethical treatment.
Yeah.
And that ethical treatment is not like this a bottom baseline foundation for society, especially in terms of like how, again, it's difficult to ask individuals to treat everyone they meet in a nice, fair manner. But that's different from asking institutions to do. And I think people often impose the confusion of individual treatment with institutional treatment.
Yeah, it's definitely different.
Yeah, but we can't have these policies and like a structure of enforcement in place to treat people ethically if we want to. And that's one of, I think, the major challenges of trying, because ultimately, like, these are the reasons why like racism and sexism and prejudices of all kinds, harmful prejudices exist, right? Because ultimately, those things mean that whatever your preferred category of exclusion is, that those people can be excluded from ethical treatment.
Well, yeah, that's just like a lot of the programs here in this state. It's like, oh, we'll help you do this and we'll help you do that. Oh, but not sex offenders. And it just seems like that's everywhere I'm looking. It's, oh, you have this program that takes somebody's conviction off. Oh, but not for sex offenders. Okay, but drug offenders and murderers and all these other people can get this waive, but yet SOs that have been out 20, 30 years that never gotten a parking ticket or a traffic stop or nothing. It just makes no sense to me.
It's extremely stigmatized, or is understandably to a certain degree like pervasive fear of sexual wrongdoing, especially living as a woman, walking alone late at night back to your car. You know, there's always like this thing in the back of your head, like, am I being followed? You know, and also because I've been followed. But again, it's also one of those things where, you know, that to understand that something is an issue in society, and for me, as somebody that understands that this is an issue in society, I would actually like to solve it productively, because I don't think all men are animals.
Thank you.
Or anything. People are very capable of change. And again, one of the things about the similarities between drug treatment and also like treatment of sex offenders to a certain degree is that both are categories where like society is very reluctant to accept evidence.
Yeah.
And to a certain degree with the sex offender registry, like there is a very small number of repeat offenders, but a huge number of people never offend again.
Ever, yeah. Yep.
And you tell that to most people, and like most people will get really upset with you when you say that that's the...
Yeah, they don't want to hear that. They never want to hear that. Like, I've gone up to Olympia, which is our capital here, and I speak to a lot of different senators. And as soon as I say the sex offender word, oh my God, you should see their faces. It's just like, why are you in my office? Get out. Do you want the conversation, or are we just going to keep pretending that this isn't an issue? It's a real big issue. You got 20,000 sex offenders in Washington State, or whatever the number is, and they're doing nothing to address anything to make it so there's compromise or understanding of it, or even just to bring up the conversation. It's such a stigma, and they're probably thinking, oh, the people that elected me are going to not want me in if I stand behind you. But in Washington State, all felons can now vote. So now sex offenders all throughout the state are voting. So I hope they start listening, because these people are going to start voting them out. And they're going to get people in there that are actually going to start to listen.
Ultimately, as a society, we should want solutions that are productive to everybody involved.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because there's like this idea in society that perps are exempt from being considered. And I think that's an extraordinarily limited way of looking at solutions. These people didn't develop in a vacuum. But that's kind of like the way people think about it, that these are evil people and they did these things because they're evil people. And since they're evil people, they need to be locked up for life. And it's just, no. People aren't necessarily born evil. And if they changed for the worse, that also means that they have the real potential to change for better.
That's true. Yep. I've seen it. I see people all the time working in transitional housing out here. I see people come out that are dead to the world, hate society, hate life, hate everything. And you give them a place to grow and to learn better ways of living. And they can change, and they do change. And it's so fulfilling to see people's lives change for the better, and to gain that sense of community and self-respect and self-love back in these people. It's a great thing to have, to be able to see.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where you never know how people are going to change. And also, if we assume certain things, then you miss out on the changes that are happening. You don't see it.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, it's definitely a case by case, and it's a person. It just depends on when they're ready and when it just turns on, and it just happens.
I would much rather that we just learn as a society to take good care of people.
I agree. Yeah.
Sorry. There's no resources for that. No care, no love. Move on. Just got to make money. Screw you.
All right. It's so much more important to fling bombs in other countries than actually take care of people.
It's about priorities, Ikoi.
It's one of those things, as somebody that I'm not going to go into detail, but as somebody that has been victimized by crime multiple times in my life, I would like a society where people don't feel like they have to commit any of those things.
Exactly.
Right? It's not like I wouldn't necessarily feel any safer that like any of the people that, did these things are behind bars, because I know that our society creates them by the lack of care.
Yep. It does.
So I don't feel like any safer about whether they're in prison or in jail or out on the street. Makes no personal difference to me. Because it's just like we have a society where none of us are getting care, really.
Yeah, that's it. Even Bezos, if you're going to extend the empathy everywhere. Bezos maybe needs a hug.
Yes, Jeff Bezos needs a hug.
Jeff Bezos needs a lot of hugs. And then he needs to work for 2 years at his own will. He needs both, right? He needs both. We're not punishing him. We're just saying, hey, look at the environment you created. You should work it to know what it's like. Absolutely. That's not punishment. That's actually not punishment. That is showing the man the result of his hard work.
All right. I'm very grateful for your time, Joshua. It's really, instructive.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being such a great guest.
Massive thank you as always to our VIP patrons: Rebecca Johns, Bruce Rogers Vaughan, Alexander Lashley, Sheena Belmas, Seamus O'Connell, Alex Placito, Alexandra McCormick, Wig Shaker, Elizabeth McKechnie, J. Daniel Richer, Fontaine, Hartley Wilmoth, and Sean Venado.
By the way, listeners, if you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And if you want to hear even more from Harriet, check out her radio show, Interpersonal Update, on WBAI and in the WBAI archives.